K98 Talk is expanding its lineup for 2015. This means we are expanding our advertising base. Whether you're a startup trying to push through to the next level or an established business trying to supplement your advertising budget, web-based advertising is a solid investment. Thanks to Talk's newest partnership with TuneIn Radio and instant access to our sister station, K98 FM, we give you worldwide access at a reasonable cost. Interested parties should email us at sales@k98fm.com. The leader in talk radio on the internet, right here on K98talk.com. Welcome to Opinion Nation.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
What makes us Americans is our shared commitment to an ideal that all of us are created equal.
I, too, am America.
Now here's your host, Bryce Robbins.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Opinion Nation. So, what's on the agenda for today? We will be talking about, first we'll start off with a lighter subject about Common Core, how Chris Christie is the biggest BSer in, I don't want to say in the presidential run right now because it's probably not true, but he's a pretty big, both in size and in BSer. Then we will move on and we will talk about the NSA, what tomorrow means for all of America, and, how it's going to affect the lives of a lot of people if Rand Paul, can pull through. Then we will end up today talking about the giant financial institutions in this nation, and we will talk about, what they're up to, because God Almighty, they are growing very, very big. So first I want to start and talk about Common Core. Common Core has been adopted in 43 of the 50 states in the United States and is responsible for, this whole argument of does the government have the right to tell our educators what to teach about. However, that argument is just nearly the surface because Common Core is something that is adopted by each state. So it is not necessarily nationalizing education, it is simply putting out a suggestion and the state governments pick it up, say this is probably a great idea, and go run with it. Chris Christie actually was one of the earliest supporters of PARC back in 2010 when it passed, and then in 2013 he did a whole interview where he said this is probably where I agree with the president the most. And he was talking about PARC and Common Core. He wasn't talking about PARC. PARC came later. We'll talk about that as well. He was talking about Common Core, which is essentially just state or government regulations or standardization of where our students need to be by the end of each grade level. However, in my opinion, what this is doing, it's taking away, a huge competitive edge that this country once had. What Common Core does is it makes everything all math and science-based, that every single student needs to be at this math level by this grade. Every single student needs to have Algebra 2 under their belt by the time they graduate. Every single student needs to have taken, 4 science classes. But you know what? Not everybody is going to build the next MacBook. Not everybody needs to be, the next... Mr. Nash, the guy who inspired the movie A Beautiful Mind, and may he rest in peace. But the thing is, not everyone needs to be a technician or a person who is an engineer of some sort. We're missing out on the good jobs that are just for the commoner, and they're not even common jobs anymore. That's the problem. They're not jobs for the commoner anymore. We're losing trade jobs. And you always see in every single school, there are kids who are put aside, who are sent to detention, suspension, because they don't want to pay attention to this math crap anymore. They don't want to listen to how you find derivatives. I guarantee you that if we started sending more kids to do trade work in high school, like they do in Germany, we would have a lot more effective students coming out of high school. Moving on to internships, rather than necessarily into college, moving into the trade fields. That is something that is huge. And I actually know somebody personally who, I don't think he failed the education system, even though numerically he did. I don't think he failed them. I think the education system failed him. Because just because he wasn't, meeting the Common Core, because math wasn't his thing and science wasn't his thing, well, that gave him the disadvantage. So when he, acted out in class or just decided not to do his work because to him it didn't make sense, well, it seems that the education system left him behind rather than placing him what he really wanted to do, work on car engines, work on automotive manufacturing. I mean, we're really going to say that Common Core is the way to go, but it leaves behind so many children in this country. But Chris Christie said, in what seemed to be a good thing, was that Common Core was coming to an end in New Jersey. However, that is bullshit. That is literally go to the zoo, find a bull, scrape up its shit. That's exactly what Chris Christie is doing. What Chris Christie wants to do is take away Common Core, but he wants to keep what is known as the PARCC tests, which that basically means he's doing absolutely nothing because the PARCC test is in line with Common Core. And another report from Seton Hall said that, which is one of New Jersey's, one of their state colleges, said that this is simply just a trick, that we're just going to change the name, tweak it a little bit, and it's going to go back to being the same old thing. Common Core is coming to an end. But in the end, it's really not. This is really just for his presidential bid. He's going to say, we're bringing about an end to Common Core. But in all reality, no, you're not, Mr. Christie. We can see right through your lying teeth. You're not doing anything to make the education system better. You're keeping the PARCC test because the people who make the PARCC test, just like many of the other standardized tests, Pearson, have funded your political campaign millions and millions of dollars, so you're going to continue to kiss their ass, and you're not going to actually get rid of Common Core. The only thing that you're doing is changing the name. It's as simple as that, and I hate you. I hope you never become president. Best regards, Bryce Robbins. Honestly, he's just doing this for his presidential run, and it is complete BS, as I've stated before. There is absolutely nothing that is going to be changing. The curriculum is still going to stay the same. But the thing is because these giant bureaucratic educators in Washington and even in New Jersey and Trenton believe that this is the way to go, that we're educating for the workforce of tomorrow. But in their vision of the workforce of tomorrow, they forget about those students who aren't math and science based, who are based around hands-on activity. What about the woodworkers? What about the steel workers? We want to bring good jobs back to America, but there are no more trades because our education system is failing those students. That might be a bold statement to make, but I think that is 100%. I think that is 100% an accurate depiction of what is happening. Next, we will go into the Patriot Act. And what we're going to talk about with the Patriot Act is, well, perhaps the craziest thing ever. I'm sorry, I'm just a little heated over the whole PARCC exam BS that Chris Christie has brought upon my state. But anyways, tomorrow night, midnight tonight, picture this. It'll be a dark and gloomy night over Washington, D.C. All of Congress and the Senate will be there, and they will be debating what is known as the Patriot Act and whether or not to keep it afloat. And Senator Rand Paul, who is, avidly opposed to the Patriot Act, is making claims that he will force the expiration of the Patriot Act Sunday by refusing to allow the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to debate on the key surveillance bill and essentially filibustering it and keeping debate alive until 12. And then after that, we will be done. And essentially, at the stroke of midnight on Sunday, the government surveillance powers originally granted by the Patriot Act after 9/11 will expire, including the National Security Agency's indiscriminate collection of domestic phone records. And this was all that good stuff that was released by Edward Snowden. So what we are seeing here is huge. I mean, this is giant. So obviously, many people are saying, well, look, we need surveillance because we live in a post 9/11 world. And any moderate person would understand that. Although Benjamin Franklin once said a person who gives up security for, gives up privacy for security or something like that, is going to lose or is the real failure or something like that. We live in a different world than Benjamin Franklin. But the new replacement would be the U.S. Freedom Act. I don't know where they get all these patriotic names from. But it's being stalled in the Senate right now, and will probably be debated if the Patriot Act is not continued. But what the U.S. Freedom Act does is it provides more oversight in the end of bulk collection of phone records. And it still lacks key provisions, however, but it will remove the original draft of mass and put an end to mass surveillance of America's basically phone records, which essentially I'm probably being recorded right now. People right now, other than my listeners, are listening to me in some office in some freaky NSA place. And it's one who thank you. Rick just actually pulled up the quote for me. It's one who chooses security over liberty shall have neither. So, I mean, we do live in a different time now. Of course, we do need security, but we also need to keep our liberty. And what mass surveillance is doing is taking our liberty away. And what will happen if this bill expires is we'll see the end of these phone records being recorded. We'll also see the end of it's end of the Executive Order 12333 and Section 702 of the FISA Court, which also allow for the bulk collection of content and media data of America's communications. What that means is, well, how John Oliver explained it on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. This is basically the best way to get it out. The government keeps your dick pics. And what's going to happen is they will no longer have access to your dick pics. Simple as that. That's probably the best way to get people to understand it. When they say media data, that is pictures. When they say content that is delivered via communications, that means your distributor, so Verizon, AT&T, they will no longer have access to those records. The FISA court will no longer be allowed to issue out warrants to collect data. This has all been under Program 215, which is huge. So if Congress lets Section 215, what they're using the term sunset, go down, the NSA will have to stop all forms of mass surveillance under this statute. Plus, it would clear the way for the debate and improve the U.S. Freedom Act. So right now what we're seeing is we have two options. We can continue with the Patriot Act, which seems to be very intrusive on the American people's lives and liberty. Or we can go the method of Rand Paul, let that expire, and have a new debate, a way post 9/11 debate, where emotions are still in the debate, but not as high as they were under the Patriot after 9/11, and we can debate the U.S. Freedom Act. And this is why democracy works, because we have an opportunity, or our elected officials have an opportunity to serve us here and protect exactly what our founding fathers would have wanted them to do: revise something that was far too intrusive and was far too against the Constitution. I mean, the Patriot Act, let's be honest, was a spit in the face to our founding fathers and was a spit on the Constitution. It allowed the Constitution to be used as toilet paper. I mean, the Patriot Act says to be protecting us, but it is intrusive on our daily lives. And nobody in this country should ever be, under surveillance when it is unwarranted and people are made unaware. And when I say unwarranted, technically I'm not correct, because the FISA court, which is a secretive court, issues warrants to, the NSA, to the government, to surveillance these people. Look, let's just make this very clear. Surveillance in this country is important. The government needs to have, a safeguard against terrorism, and they need to be on the lookout. Because if we're not proactive and we are reactive, we will suffer more terrorism attacks on a large scale, such as 9/11. Maybe if the Patriot Act was around prior to 9/11, maybe we would have known about it. Well, actually, we did kind of know about 9/11 happening before it did, because there were several records and there were several, statements that said that the World Trade Center would be coming under attack again, but we didn't really do much in preparation. That's not a conspiracy. That's just what happened. But ultimately, we do need surveillance. But I don't want every picture I send, every text message I send, every phone call I make going to the government, because that is intrusive. That is 1984 shit, and that is not okay in America. So what we need to do is rehaul our surveillance in this country. And Senate Leader Mitch McConnell doesn't want to do this. He wants to keep the Patriot Act. And you know what? It gives the government far too much power, and it also gives corporations too much power. Corporations such as Verizon, AT&T, even Google, because they are tracking everything you are looking up. They are tracking you from the second you go on that computer to the second you get off of it. And that is not okay. We don't want the government knowing where we are, knowing what we're doing every second of the day. That's just intrusion. That is not acceptable in this country. We do not live in a dictatorship, and we most certainly do not live in China. So, thank God this bill is finally within a day away almost of being sunsetted, of being taken away, and maybe our democracy can prevail, our elected officials can prevail, and bring about new debate on the U.S. Freedom Act, which still lacks, again, key provisions, and it needs to be revised, and it needs to give more security measures, but ultimately it is stopping and ending mass surveillance. Because I am not a terrorist, and I don't want to be searched before I am even charged with anything. It is in our Fourth Amendment right. We have a limit, and there is no unwarranted search and seizure. And although they're giving a warrant in secret, I'm not being made aware of it. And I mean, I know that the Founding Fathers used pretty vague words by using the word, unreasonable search and seizure. So technically, I mean, I guess you could say they're within their constitutional right, the government, because it's maybe in their version, it is, I guess, necessary. But, there's no need for mass surveillance. It's scary. It gives the government too much power. So, before I go into break, I just want to recap a little bit about what we just talked about, because a lot of that is pretty heavy. So, things to look out for. Common Core in your state, because in New Jersey it came to an end. So odds are is wherever you see a Republican running for office, they're probably going to take a strong stance against Common Core, which sounds great, and I support that. But if nothing changes in your state, don't be surprised. It's probably just so they can get ahead in the presidential poll numbers. That's exactly what Chris Christie is doing. And look out tomorrow. Tomorrow, turn on C-SPAN, watch the debates, understand what's going on. Right now, I guarantee you, because Skype was one of the services that was put out in Edward Snowden's report that gets recorded and stored. Right now, I am being recorded by the government. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm using my freedom of speech, and yet they are keeping track of what I'm saying, which is kind of weird. And every time I send a picture to somebody, or as John Oliver would explain it, every time a dick picture is sent, that is stored by the government. And to me, that is intrusion, and to me, that is only the surface. Because, I mean, that's just, we feel uncomfortable about that, but what about the fact that they can search on your computer? They can take files from your computer without you even knowing. I mean, they can track who we're calling, and they can listen in on our conversations. Well, why? Why does the average American... We're not terrorists, okay? Why don't... They should stop focusing on mass surveillance and focus on surveilling those who are doing wrong. So, thank God, tomorrow at 12 a.m., or 12 midnight, yeah, we have an opportunity to end mass surveillance in this country, the bulk collection of data. And the FISA court might have a rude awakening. So I'm going to go to break right now. Those are things to look out for. Set your alarms, stay up, watch C-SPAN tomorrow at 12, because Rand Paul might do something great for America, and we might see the U.S. Freedom Act be a replacement for the Patriot Act. All right, when I come back, we are going to talk about the big banks. We're going to talk about how they have grown, and, well, this is a pretty shitty situation for the United States. So when I come back, that's what we're going to talk about. This is Opinion Nation. I'm Bryce Robbins, and hopefully I can make sense out of this. All right, stay tuned, everybody.
I want to hide. I want to tear down the walls and hold me inside. I want to
K98Talk.com, a leader in internet radio. So grab your seatbelts and take the ride of your life on K98Talk.com. The staff of K98 Talk and the Spark Radio Network is proud to announce that our very own Rowdy Rick Robinson has been selected as one of the top conservative talk show hosts in the nation for his program America Off the Rail. Again, congratulations to Rowdy Rick Robinson for a job well done and another reason to stay connected to K98 Talk and the Spark Radio Network.
We will never fully understand what we've asked of our military service members or their families, asking them to put themselves in harm's way, to endure it all. But we do understand that it's our turn, our duty, to keep them secure for the rest of their lives. Wounded Warrior Project long-term support programs help our most severely ill or injured veterans live independently, at no cost, for life, so that they might stand at ease. Join us at findwwp.org.
K98 Talk is expanding its lineup for 2015. This means we are expanding our advertising base. Whether you're a startup trying to push through to the next level or an established business trying to supplement your advertising budget, web-based advertising is a solid investment. Thanks to Talk's newest partnership with TuneIn Radio and instant access to our sister station, K98 FM, we give you worldwide access at a reasonable cost. Interested parties should email us at sales@k98fm.com.
Welcome back, everybody, and I am going to kick things off with a good old quote from TJ, Thomas Jefferson. Keeping it cool with TJ. All right. So I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of currency, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. I gave that quote last week when I was talking about the corruption and destruction that the Federal Reserve brings upon this country. But, of course, the Federal Reserve is just like let's make it a Star Wars topic, okay? So imagine in Star Wars. I hope everyone listening has seen Star Wars. If you haven't seen Star Wars, don't listen to me. Get out. Okay, but the Emperor is like the Federal Reserve, and all of the Chancellor Palpatine's Sith Lords. We had Count Dooku and Darth Maul and Darth Vader, obviously, and whoever takes the place in the new movie. Well, all these Sith are like the banks. They're like the Emperor's hitmen. And I guess that's the best way to put it. And they go around and they take advantage of the planets in the galaxy. And the planets in the galaxy are like the people. So we are all getting taken advantage of, and we are all, forced to adhere to these giant banks, or the Galactic Empire in Star Wars terms. And it's really freaking bad. And you would imagine that, well, look, the what's known as the Great Recession of 2007 or 2008, well, obviously, then we would fix whatever happened. Come on. Obviously, that just makes sense. When you get knocked down, you come back better and stronger and safer than before, because it makes sense to make restrictions, kind of like how after 9/11 we passed the Patriot Act. You would think after the Great Recession, we would pass an equivalent for banks, kind of like after the Great Depression, where we implemented all of these safeguards that, well, unfortunately, a lot were repealed to make sure that the banks never had so much power. We had the FDIC was implemented as an insurance agency for the people in case of another loss. But let me just bring about something very interesting. It's what Robert Reich calls the bridge graph, I believe. You can look it up. It's really a suspension bridge graph, where a suspension bridge has its two highest points, and that models the level of income in the financial industry, which is pretty interesting. You see, whenever the top whenever 23% of the wealth is held by the top 5%, we have entered into huge recessions, such as the Great Depression in 1928. 23% of the wealth was held by 5% of this nation. In 2007, 23% of the wealth was held by the top 5% of this nation. Many parallels here. In addition to that, there was a huge explosion in the finance industry. Essentially, Wall Street exploded. Stocks were doing better than ever, but they were going very, very fast, and they were soaring very, very high. Now, across the board, all over this country, people felt the Great Recession. I know that my father used to be an entrepreneur, and he got out of that industry quick because he said, as a small business owner, I was the first to feel when a recession was about to happen, when the market was going fallow, and he understood what was happening. But the big banks in this country really gave the middle finger to the people and screwed us over, because they're not in the business of helping people. They're in the business of making money. So you would imagine that since the banking collapse in 2007, starting with the Lehman Brothers and all these other banks going bust, before my lovable the Fed bailed them out, we could see that there would be necessary precautions that would be taken to make sure that this never happened again. Unfortunately, that shit never came through. So the top banks in the world in 2013, we have JP Morgan and Chase Group, or Chase Co. We have Bank of America Corporation. We have Citigroup. We have Wells Fargo. And we have Goldman Sachs. All of which are some of the biggest funders of the political arena. Bank of America and Wells Fargo were actually among the biggest funders for Mitt Romney's campaign, while Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan were among the biggest funders of Obama's campaign. Now, in 2013, their assets were very, very freaking big. So, about $8 trillion. It's a lot of money. That is a crapload of money. And what we're seeing is that that's too much money. That's 60%. Their assets are the equivalent of 60% of the nation's wealth. 60%! I mean, what the hell? These institutions become far too big. But here's the bigger problem. In 2008, those same groups were smaller. They had a combined total wealth of almost $6 trillion, of $6 trillion. So their wealth is growing. One report said that according to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, bank profits in the first quarter of this year were, quote, the best for the industry since the $36.8 billion earned in the second quarter of 2007. The banks did better this year than prior to the recession. It said JP Morgan is currently pulling in record profits. Next I would take you to this, is that the banks earn nearly banks make nearly 1/3 of the total corporate profits. So what that means is the financial sector accounts for about 30% of the total corporate profits, which is actually down from before the financial crisis when they made up closer to 40%. So that, in a sense, is a good thing, but that just goes to show you that they're not spending money on small businesses. Next, since 2008, banks have gotten a lot bigger, as I've shown. Okay, so due to the failure of small competitors and merging facilitators during the 2008 crisis, the nation's biggest banks, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, are now bigger than they were prior to the recession. Prior to the recession, the four biggest banks held 32% of the nation's deposits, and they now hold nearly 40%. The problem is banks are in the business of making money, and what they're doing is freaking sick. Okay, they're taking in money, they're giving out money, and they are giving out money that they don't have. That's what happened when the banking crisis hit, when the housing market went bad. Okay, so what happens is these big banks say, come on, sure, we can give you all this money. Hey, no problem. You need a loan, we're going to give you this loan. You need to take a mortgage out, we're going to give you this mortgage. But they weren't checking if people could afford it. Then they funnel credit cards down your throat. And the stupidity of the consumer, I guess, there has to be some personal responsibility here. Well, they go along with it. The problem is these banks aren't regulated, so they keep doing this shit. And what they did in 2008 with the housing market was they were giving out loans to people who simply just couldn't afford them. And they were essentially, what happens is I put my money in. My money, I'm trusting that the bank has my money when I come back. However, the bank was giving out so much money in mortgages and loans to people who couldn't afford them that when I came back for my money and they asked for the money from their, the people who took out mortgages and they didn't have it, well, then fuck, my money is now gone. And people lose confidence in the banks, and then the stock market crashes, and we are in a crisis. So what we need to do is stop focusing so much on the financial industry. We need to break these institutions up because they make bubbles, and then they rely on the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve funds them money and they gain power and they take power away from the people. These big institutions, I'm telling you, the next bubble is coming, and it's with student loan debt, because private debtors, when you got to go to a bank to get your student loan because I guess you have bad credit or something, that's the next bubble that's coming. And it's going to pop, and we're going to all feel it. But hang on, that's a totally different discussion for a totally different day. What we need to focus on is the fact that these banks need to get broken up. Bernie Sanders, my boy, as I like to refer to him, my boy Bernie, said these institutions are too big to fail. And anything too big to fail is too big to exist. And that he would tear down the banking institution. Which, why not? Nobody in their right mind should be in support of these giant banks because they're the bitches to the Federal Reserve, which I'll read another quote that I gave up last episode when I said the refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system, which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators, was probably the prime cause of the revolution that was said by Benjamin Franklin. So what we see is this. The money manipulators are now in control of this country. And that is exactly what our founding fathers fought against. And they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they're giants. And one day, not too far from now, they're going to pop again. There's going to be a bubble. It's going to pop. And the Federal Reserve is going to get more power and fund them some more. And it's going to come off the back of the taxpayers. This banking system is broken. So for the remainder of the episode, I'm going to talk about what we can do to fix it. And to me, it's a simple decision. But I mean, it just seems that, this wouldn't fly in Washington, at least now. It would fly with Bernie Sanders. It wouldn't fly with, the rest. But rather than having banks, we open up community credit unions. And right now, I feel like anybody listening who is strictly opposed to socialism just probably tuned me out and said, oh my God, there's a socialist talking. It's not necessarily true. But what community credit unions would do for this country would be far better than what the banks do. What a community credit union does is it's set up by a community, is run by an elected group that serve terms, and they handle the finances. And what happens is the community itself puts in money to the credit union, and then it operates as a small bank who is already federally insured. And they have the same exact perks as a bank. You can use ATM cards, you can use debit cards, credit cards, whatever. The only thing that's different is the size and the level of, control of this country is credit unions are very small. A smaller financial industry would probably be a better way to go. If communities had giant credit unions or districts had giant credit unions, not giant credit unions, but big credit unions, that would lead to a more prosperous country. Because we wouldn't be held in this manipulative money system. We would have an honest system where you could take out loans and you could give back loans at modest interest rates. And why are they modest interest rates, you may ask? Because the excess that a community credit union makes is given back to the people. You see, when banks have these billion-dollar, Christmas bonuses that they give to their employees, it's because they made extra. They made more than they were expecting, so they can give giant bonuses to their people. In credit unions, rather than giving giant bonuses, what they do is they distribute that money back to the people because it's a socially run organization. And that means lower interest rates and more interest on your deposits. Credit unions are the way to go. And although they seem to be socialist and rather not capitalist, in this instance, in the financial institution where it's so volatile and so fierce, right now at least, it seems that maybe capitalism isn't working because capitalism in the financial institution is hurting the American people. And that is undeniable. We should not wage war on capitalism. We should wage war on capitalism in the financial institution because ultimately they are taking advantage of the people in the United States. That is just the fact of the matter. I mean, imagine if we had credit unions versus the big banks. We would focus, first of all, they would not have nearly the amount of power that the banks have in elections. They wouldn't be able to fund campaigns the way that the big banks do, and therefore Washington wouldn't be in the pocket of the financial industry. Second, we would also see that it would be localized, that states, localities would have control over their own finances, and the banks are also still federally insured. And the third point that I already just stated was that, well, it's simple. The credit unions would give their excess profits back to the people, giving the community more spending money, more money in general, because their deposits would have greater interest. And it just seems that it would be better for the people. So what you can extrapolate from here is that capitalism is a beautiful thing when we're talking about, the free market or, the development of a product. But when capitalism is left to itself and we just let the gears keep going, we can see people take advantage. There are issues that come about. See, what capitalism is it's not, the term free market is very deceptive. Okay, any type of economy, whether it's socialist, communist, free market, what that means is how many rules are imposed on the people in the economy. How many rules are there in the economic sector? And what we can conclude is simple, that when we don't have enough rules to stop these financial institutions, they take advantage. But when you want to talk to a small business owner, then yes, you lighten up the rules so that they can grow. It is simple. What we need to do is break up the banks. We need to end JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, because in the end, they're screwing the American people. I think that is a belief that could be held by everybody. And the only people who are going to disagree with that are the people whose campaigns get funded up the wazoo by these financial institutions. So, if you're on the side of my boy TJ, Thomas Jefferson, Bernie Sanders, and Benjamin Franklin, and John F. Kennedy, because don't forget that cool quote that I brought up last week about him exposing the plot of the financial institutions and the Fed, then you would be on the side of credit unions. Yes, it is not capitalist. Yes, it is more socialist. But it works, and it will work better for the people. It simply makes sense. We need to start making sense out of what we're doing, because the financial institution has taken our country and run amok with it. All right. Well, I guess that's all I really have to say. I got my thoughts out about that. So, next week I'm probably going to be trying to continue the whole Confederate America series. I'm going to try to bring back a guest, this time one who's coherent and doesn't believe that Robert E. Lee fought in Vietnam. Yeah, you heard that right. And if you didn't hear that right, you can go check out that episode on Spreaker or on TuneIn Radio. And yeah, we had an episode where somebody said that Robert E. Lee was a veteran of Vietnam. So I encourage you to go check that out. But seriously, go check out all our episodes. Go over to, on Facebook, we have Opinion Nation News. That is where we share articles, we have debate, and our Facebook page, thanks to everyone, is exploding. We now have 3,700 likes, so keep going. I got to gloat a little bit to Rick that I exceeded him in likes now. And I guess it's because people like liberals more. No, I'm just kidding. Rick knows some of my secrets to getting likes, but hopefully those aren't exposed. But guys, please hit like, comment. I want to hear comments, post whatever you want. Let's have a forum for debate. But I want to leave on one message before I go into, giving some more promos about next week. All these topics that I talked about today, Common Core. Okay, we talked about the Patriot Act. We talked about the financial institutions. At its root, there is less of a divide in this country than I think. I think that Republicans and Democrats, the opening to finding common ground probably says it best. We have big issues in this country, bigger issues than being Republican or Democrat. The financial institution has clearly grown beyond its bridges. And they need to be taken down. The surveillance in this country is far too big and needs to be taken down. Education in this country has spiraled into this competitive, worldwide effort to make us number one, according to some BS charts. So, all this shit shows that when left unregulated, government, industry, and organizations can grow too big. That is why we need regulation and we need participation of people. We need to fight apathy and we need to get educated. We need to realize that Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin are a couple of our founding fathers who set up a beautiful country for we the people. But when we the people are apathetic and don't care, we don't care about Common Core, we don't care about the Patriot Act, that one in particular, and we don't care about what the Fed does or what the big banks do, well, then it's pretty much you're giving the middle finger to the people who set up a government for we the people. There's a famous story that I'll leave us on, that after coming out of Liberty Hall, a woman came up to Benjamin Franklin, and she said, "So what is it? What kind of government do we have now? What have you guys concluded on?" And he said, "Well, it's left up to you, the people. It's whatever you make of it." Those words are freaking deep. I mean, what he's saying is, it's what you make of it. It's how much you participate. That's what your government is. Your government can control you and be a dictatorship if you decide to be apathetic and not participate. Or it can be a beautiful democracy and can serve the role of what it was intended to do and fight for the people. That is if you participate. So the reason that these giant banks are around, the reason that the Patriot Act is around, the reason that Common Core freaking sucks, is because we don't have enough people who care. So we need to get loud. We need to start to scream, and we can't give in. The Occupy Wall Street movement is probably the greatest example of people getting sick of the same old shit that we take from these giant groups. Unfortunately, though, it ended up to dying off. So, I guess my message for you today is, don't be apathetic. Go online, read the news, don't get depressed, but do research. Know the area you're living in, and you know what? I hope I can encourage somebody to run for office and create a credit union in their locality. Anyways, one final promo. This is Opinion Nation News. I am Bryce Robbins. Go like us on Facebook and have a wonderful Saturday, and we will catch you next week. And don't forget, tomorrow, 12 a.m. You know what's happening? Patriot Act is going down. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, have a beautiful Saturday. Have a beautiful week. I will be back on Finding Common Ground next week, and I will be back on Opinion Nation next week, and we will be talking about Confederates in America. All right. Rick, if you can take us out as you always do. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, have a great week. Fight apathy.
Welcome to Opinion Nation.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
What makes us Americans is our shared commitment to an ideal, that all of us are created equal.
I, too, am America.